All around this world of ours, birds are a delicious option for dinner. Chicken might be the most common, but turkey, quail, and pheasant and many others are enjoyed on special occasions or as a delicacy. And in the world of Pokemon, people all over from Alola to Unova all need to eat. Which brings up the question, which bird would be the most delicious? Now I fully understand that by diving into this topic, I will probably never be accepted into Team Sky. Unless they need a chef on the team. In which case, hit me up. As of right now, there are 132 flying type Pokemon, but not every flying type is a bird. Such as Rotom. No one's eating a floating oscillating fan, but a floating oven kinda comes in handy for this. But that's an electric fire type, so it does not count. And neither does Drifloon. I don't need no screeching souls stinking up my kitchen. Get out of here with that. And on the other side, not all birds are flying types. Which doesn't make a lot of sense because some of the birds that are flying types don't fly. But either way, we will talk about them when they come up. And for as many of these as possible, I will be comparing them to their real world counterparts. So, you can prepare them yourselves if the opportunity ever arises. Let's start with one that has definitely been consumed, which is Farfetch'd. And we know it has because at one point it was on the brink of extinction, people liked eating it so much. And it makes sense that people would eat it because it's the personification of an old Japanese idiom asking, what did you expect? A duck to come with its own green onion? Because duck and leek soup? Pretty common. And pretty tasty. So when this happenstance would occur all the time, people are gonna make so much soup. And if you're gonna make soup, maybe try one of the other duckmons, like Ducklet. And it's not quite a flying type, but Magby's like a fire duck. And then there's Porygon 2, which is basically a lab-grown duck. Another good soupmon is Wattrel. Although, you wouldn't put it in a soup because, look at it, it's so tiny, there's barely any meat on there. Instead, you would eat its nest, like we do with Swiftlets in bird nest soup. You might be imagining a nest as a collection of like sticks and leaves, which would be terrible to eat. But luckily for us, Swiftlets actually make their nest with their own saliva, which then hardens and then softens up into a jelly-like consistency when warmed up in a broth. It is pretty expensive, so there's a good chance that Team Star already has an underground ring set up to sell it on the low. Aerodactyl might not be good eaten as is, but could make for a good stock. While stone soup is a thing of Irish legend, so do I, stir-fried stones, are a real thing. Although you would probably want something smaller and more oceany like a Roggenrola for this. But you still might be able to extract some interesting bygone flavors from this ancient sky dino. Or it will make a soup that tastes like dirt. If you're sitting there wondering, hey, how would I make my own broth with any of these Pokemon? Like this. So you had a Nuzlocke go sideways and now need to do something with your fallen Pokemon? And you chose soup? Neat! To make it, all you need is 2 parts onion, 1 part each of carrot and celery, along with the bones of the type of broth you're trying to make, as well as a few herbs and peppercorns to round it out. Top all of that up with water, bring it to a boil, and then down to a simmer for a few hours. Veg and fish stock takes about 2 to 4 hours, chicken 6 to 12, and beef 12 to 24. To make a darker stock, roast off the veg and bones before throwing them into your stock pot. When it's ready, strain out all the solid bits and keep the liquid. Because that's the soup. As natural as it may seem, do not do the opposite. Give the solids a little squeeze to get every last bit of broth out of there, and there you have it. The basis for your own Poke Soup. Next up we have Pidgey, the first flying type Pokemon that you would encounter in the first Pokemon games. Now, Pidgey looks a lot like a female rose-breasted grosbeak, which is interesting because a male rose-breasted grosbeak looks a lot like a Tailo. So we're already starting to see that the world of Pokemon is just a little different than our own. In our world, rose-breasted grosbeaks, not commonly eaten. However, in Kanto, it's one of 12 birds in the area. And look at it. It looks like it'd be pretty delicious. Especially when it evolves into a turkey-sized Pidgeotto. Pidgeot, however, that would probably be a little too gamey. Kind of like eating an eagle. An eagle that eats Magikarp, which would be delicious as sushi, but its evolution, Gyarados, the flying water type that looks like a dragon but isn't a dragon, probably not as tasty. You can kind of make the argument that it's just a giant eel and would be good as unagi, but the cuts are going to be like this big. When you get eel cuts this big, they're not going to taste very good. Especially when you have an eel electric just floating around. Use that instead. Speaking of too big, Butterfree, the butterfly Pokemon. And no, insects are not excluded because in some parts of the world, insects are a delicacy. And some say, the future of cuisine as we know it. Are butterflies a part of that future? No, not really. There's been some fancy chefs who have used them as like a garnish, but that would be a smaller butterfly, like a Pavilion. Butterfree, just a little too plump. And toxic. As are Masquerain and Beautifly. Spearow kind of looks like an angry chicken, but it's more of a sparrow or a finch if we're being honest. And Fearow would be far too stringy. Zubat and anything Zubat-esque is a no. A Pokemon that raises a few questions is one that you might have started with and had on your team all the way to the Elite Four, which is Charizard. Another flying type that's not a dragon type, even though it is the literal personification of a dragon. You're telling me Charizard looks less like a dragon than Dragonite? Come on. But the fire typing, I do very much agree with, and that's kind of where the problem is. Because in its Leaf Green Pokedex entry, it says it can melt boulders. Now, to melt a boulder, you need to reach a temperature between 600 and 1200 degrees Celsius. If you turn your oven up to that temperature, you're not going to have a delicious roast. You're going to have a charred Charizard. But also probably not, because it can withstand those temperatures. So you need something even hotter than that. Something hotter than a literal volcano. So for this list, I kind of think that fire types need to be excluded. Not the biggest loss because there's only a handful of firebirds, but it does eliminate the chicken Pokemon Torchic, as well as Moltres and Ho-Oh, leaving Articuno as the only viable mythic bird option for any menu. And quite frankly, I think Articuno would be pretty tasty. Doduo and Dodrio are found in the Safari Zone, which is basically an open-air zoo. And I don't know if you should be eating zoo animals.
Hey there, Zachary Zooman here. Are you wondering if you can walk into your local zoo, open air or otherwise, and just begin consuming the curated wildlife? Well, as a former proprietor of a nature conservatory, which is distinctly different than a zoo, I'm here to tell you that that act is not recommended. Especially in the Safari Zone, where you only have a limited amount of time and a limited amount of safari balls. Don't waste either of those trying to cook up a Scyther. And if you happen to run into something that feels like it should be in a zoo, probably a good idea to keep your mouth off of it. So no going Tuku for Toucanon, the toucan Pokemon that evolves from a woodpecker, proving that if you believe hard enough, anything is possible, including moving up to the far north, far away from your problems. Well, that's it for me, and once again, please don't give this section an alliterative title. Zachary Zooman, not a fan of repeating letters.
Zachary Zooman, zoo zips. Zachary Zooman, zoo zips. Zachary Zooman, Zachary Zooman, Zachary Zooman, zoo zips. Mantine, a flying type that flies through water, would be delicious on rice, because it's basically a meaty skate fish. Skate wings are popular in Korea, enjoyed as a fillet or fermented, and have a little bit of a sweetness to them, kind of like a cross between a scallop and a cod. When fermented though, it can get a little funky. Similar to the sharks used for Hakaro in Iceland, skatefish does urinate through its skin, and that gives it a bit of an ammonia smell and also helps with the preservation process, killing a lot of bad bacteria. But it does smell like ammonia. Mantine also has the fun benefit of coming with a Remoraid. So if you're plating it up, you can make it so one person gets that Remoraid and then is blessed for the next year with good luck, or whatever superstition you want to attach to it. Togekiss has a similar structure, but it tends to avoid strife. And I think hunting it down so you can fillet it and then pan-sear it and then serve it with a nice burn nosette is gonna cause it some strife. Its pre-evolution Togepi is kind of balut, but canonically it's like a foot tall, so I'm gonna lean no on that actually. Skarmory is said to be covered in a metal armor, and not actually metal itself. So I think if you can crack into it like a lobster, whatever's inside might be pretty tasty. And if there isn't anything inside, well, the feathers would make for a great chef's knife. Hoppip wouldn't be the best for the main part of a roast dinner, but as a salad green, toss in a little olive oil, salt and pepper, would probably bring some nice balance to the meal. It also resembles a flying radish, so you could take the greens from the top and then add in the rest for a little bit of bite. Or pickle it. So you want to pickle a Hoppip, eh? That's kind of twisted, but okay. All you need is 1 part sugar, 1 part water, and 1 part vinegar. Throw all of that into a pot and bring it to a boil. And while that's happening, trim the ends and quarter it up. If it's a little bigger, cut it into 6 or even 8ths. Once the liquid has come to a boil, pour it over the top, making sure to get most of it onto what you're pickling. Let it sit for an hour or so and that's it. A quick, simple, pickled hot pip. Skiploom we can skip, and Jumpluff is far too cottony, and you should not eat cotton balls. Something people learned the hard ways during a 2010s fad diet. Instead, use it to make the placemats. The Rowlet line, however, is not going to be good for salads. It's just too woody and tough, as is Howlucha. But Tropius, already canonically food. You see, the fruit around its neck ripens twice a year, and it's very tasty. It also really enjoys eating that fruit, and the later Dex entries state that's why it began growing it in the first place. It's kind of like when you eat too many carrots and become a carrot yourself. Also, the fruit is the part of the plant where the seeds are kept, so for it to bloom in the first place, it would probably require some kind of pollination. Now, I'm no Pokebotanist or anything, but I think this occurs when a Combi battles 2 different Tropiuses, or 2 Tropiuses battle each other, and when they're battling, their necks kind of touch, and that's how the pollination happens. This is what's known as the birds. Speaking of, Thundurus, and Landorus, and Tornadus. They're kind of birds in their Therian form, so I don't want them to feel left out. And also, in a way, you can eat. Delibird would make for a fantastic Christmas dinner, but it kind of goes around giving up food already, so instead of having one big meal, just let it forage and then you'll have several smaller snacks. Although it is a bit of a trick-or-treat situation because Delibird itself is an omnivore, so the snack it chose might be a Caterpie, because bug-type Pokemon get eaten a lot. So if you have a Weedle that you really like, maybe keep it out of the woods. Now, some birds are not good for us to eat because of what they eat, such as vultures and ravens, who are scavengers, and their flesh is filled with toxins that are not going to be good for the average person. A non-average person who's built up their tolerance by eating increasing amounts of carrion fowl, they might be okay. Perhaps they're a person who regularly eats crow, a phrase that means to be humbled, because actually eating crow is quite distasteful. This is a turn of phrase that is believed to be popularized by a very funny 1950s joke that went a little like, P-Dove closely resembles the hot cuisine fowl of squab, aka wood pigeon, a small delicious bird that was enjoyed until the mid-20th century until chicken became the go-to sky meat. Nowadays it's mostly found in high-end restaurants, just like its evolution on pheasant, which was once the most popular game bird in the UK, now is the most popular roadkill bird in the UK. But if you're posh, you can order up a dish called pheasant under glass, which is a whole roasted pheasant under a glass cloche. And you know you're in fancy town when there's a cloche involved. Even fancier is a cloth over your head so God doesn't see what you're doing, which would most likely be the case with Oricorio. A little different than the Orlan bunting found in France, but I do think if the French found a Lola, they would be over the moon about 4 different variations of this small bird that can be drowned in Armagnac and enjoyed whole, bones and all, but not the beak, because that's the part you hold on to. These days, the eating of ortolan isn't something that happens too often, mainly because the bird is very endangered and not because of the preparation or the sin of it all. For a less sinful snack, try a combi. In Laos, roasted honeycomb, complete with the pupa, is a street food delicacy, described as tasting like fatty honey and being agreeably crunchy. But because the honeycomb is served with the pupa, you kind of have to take a combi and a cocoon and sort of just put them together. But make sure to do this away from the gaze of any Beedrills or Vespiquen that might be nearby, because they are not going to be happy if they see what you're up to. Finally, our last two birds, Natu and Zatu. Now, my general stance on cooking psychic types is, don't. Now, I don't really have any solid information to back me up on this, but I do feel like eating psychic types is going to result in you having nightmares. I don't know how long these nightmares would last, but also, I don't want to find out. But maybe you're the type who does and wants to brag about it. You could be all like, I ate this bird and then for the next week, in my slumber, I was in a classroom with my teeth falling out, and then out of the corner I would hear, this is what happens when you eat the flesh of the Zatu. I don't think it'd be worth it. But hopefully what was worth it was this whole culinary adventure we went on. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, like button, subscribe. Maybe send this to a friend of yours and show them that the culinary landscape is much more vast than they could ever imagine. Bye now.